Shalom. This week we are beginning the book of Deuteronomy, Sefer Devarim and Parashat Devarim. And the book of Devarim is known as Mishneh Torah, which literally means a review of the Torah or an explanation of the Torah. And this fifth book of the Torah is considered to be on a different footing altogether. It's a different level of the Torah, and essentially it is the parting words of Moshe Rabbeinu, of the great teacher Moshe, his parting words to his beloved people of Israel. The generation of the desert has passed. The generation that is about to enter into the land of Israel is ready to take up the challenge. And Moshe, who is not going to be accompanying his people, is delivering his final, actually impassioned plea. What should we call it? His review. His entire life's being is really capsulized in the words of this final book of the Torah. Indeed, Moshe Rabbeinu began his recitation on Rosh Chodesh Shabbat, on the beginning of the month of Shabbat, and spent the last 5 weeks of his life giving over this, the deepest Torah of the book of Devarim, right before his death. And he reviewed many key principles and values and commandments of the Torah, and he also gave them some new commandments and some new insights as well. Why now? Because they are about to go in and start their life as the people of God and the land of Israel. And this is it. So this is a whole new beginning for the people. This is the goal. This has been the goal all along. He's not going to be accompanying them, and he's giving over to them his very essence, his very substance, everything he can possibly give over to them now. And last week, we spoke about the travels of the children of Israel from the time they left Egypt until they were ready to go into the Promised Land. Now, the book of Devarim begins with words of rebuke. There is a concept here that Ele HaDvarim, these are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. There is a whole idea that is discussed by our sages about what these words really mean, how Moshe, in a very special way, in a very inimitable, unusual fashion, gathered together the entire nation and gave them over some harsh words, some words of rebuke regarding the past 40 years. Now, last week we mentioned that when God was, as it were, reflecting on the 42 stages of the journey of the children of Israel throughout the desert, that he looked back in compassion, and he was essentially looking at these travels throughout the years, at these stations, with fondness. Even if there were problems here and there that cropped up, that were major issues in the relationship of the Almighty with his people. As we mentioned, the beauty of the really poetic rendition of the names of the way stations in Parashat Maseh, the last portion of the book of Numbers, was emphasizing how precious these journeys were, no matter what happened there. But even though that is the case, still, everyone has to take responsibility. Yes, God doesn't hold our backslidings against us, but there is a major principle that we have to have accountability. We have to take responsibility for our actions so that we can learn from our mistakes and hopefully continue to grow spiritually. So now Moshe, before he is to leave his people, gathers together the whole nation and delivers to them this rebuke. But this is so amazing. It's one of the mysteries of the Torah, this portion, especially how it begins, because Moshe delivered his rebuke in a way that no one else could do. He delivered it in a way that had to be done. He had to address in a very frontal manner, had to address their serious transgressions, but he did it in a way that was ever so subtle. It was so subtle, and it was so respectful of who they were, to the extent that very famously some of our great sages reviewed these verses in the beginning of our portion. The words read, "These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan concerning the wilderness, concerning the Arava, opposite the Sea of Reeds, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Chatzerot and Dizahav." And our sages say, we've gone over the entire Torah, and guess what? There's no such place as Tophel and Lavan. And our sages tell us these names are actually veiled references to particular incidents that took place that were a reason for embarrassment for the people of Israel. But rather than embarrass them, Moshe delivered his strong rebuke in a way that would allow his people to save face, and yet to seriously understand what he's saying, and to bring it home and to process it and to have to deal with it. They did it in such an amazing way. Where does that come from? What kind of leader is that? How did he do that, and why? From where did he, after a lifetime, decades of a career of essentially really receiving a lot of abuse from these very people, now, the moment of truth, when it's his duty to give them a serious rod of chastisement, he can't do it in a way that would bring them any embarrassment, or that could, God forbid, hurt them in a negative way. He wants them to grow spiritually from it. And this is its own world, this whole idea of that level of the compassion of Moshe. Indeed, some of our great sages, discussing this very concept, the concept of the rebuke that Moshe delivered, they were talking about it time of the greatest sages of Israel, Rabbi Tarfon, conclusion of the period of the Second Temple. Rabbi Tarfon said, "Is there anyone even in this generation that can rebuke?" And then the great Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah responded, and he said, "And is there anyone in this generation who knows how to receive rebuke?" And then the great Rabbi Akiva said, "And is there anyone in this generation who knows how to rebuke anyway?" So something about the way that Moshe did this that was so remarkable. And this Parshat Devarim, always comes out in the first Shabbat of the month of Av. Always comes out actually in Shabbat Chazon. Chazon, the vision, called so because of the first words of the Haftarah, the prophetic reading that's read on this Shabbat, which of course is the beginning of the prophecy of Isaiah. And Shabbat Chazon is the Sabbath that precedes Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av. Now, of course, in the deepest secrets of the Torah, there's a tradition that the first Shabbat of a month contains a capsulization, a crystallization, a concentration of the nature, the character of that entire month. So the first Shabbat of Av is, in essence, everything that Av, Menachem Av, this month, should be. And more so, there's also a tradition that the Shabbat before a Moed, before a holiday, before a festival, before one of the sacred seasons, that Shabbat already carries with it, exudes an illumination of that festival that's about to come out that week. Therefore, this Shabbat, the first Shabbat of the month of Menachem Av, the Consoling Father, during which always, invariably, throughout history, every single time, Parashat Devarim, the first Torah portion of the book of Deuteronomy comes out always on this Shabbat, which is the first Shabbat of the month of Av, and the Shabbat immediately preceding Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day of the destruction of both temples, the day of calamity. So there's some commonality between the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu and the idea of this month, because essentially this month is a time of rebuke, is it not? This is the month of chastisement, of the rod of heaven, as it were. This is a time of rebuke. But why is it that this parsha always falls out on this Shabbat? I'm looking for a more direct connection. And I think that the deeper that we understand the relationship of Moshe Rabbeinu and what is really behind this amazing level of this loving rebuke that he gave over to his precious people, the more that we can understand what that was all about, the more that we can understand something about this month and something that connects this parsha with this month. If ever it could be said that the people of Israel have an earthly father, that would be Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is really the father of the Jewish people, bringing them from Egypt, bringing them out of bondage, bringing them to Mount Sinai, delivering to them the Torah, introducing them, as it were, to the God of their fathers, delivering them to the threshold of the Promised Land. And one of the things that we understand, hopefully after having been with Moshe throughout the entire arc of his career, from the time that he appeared in the book of Exodus, certainly through all of the incidents of the book of Numbers, and really beginning to climax now in the book of Deuteronomy, we begin to appreciate his unconditional love and acceptance for his people. He had such mercy for them, he had such understanding for them, that even when chastising them, he only sought their good. And so too, in many ways, this month of Av, which is actually called Menachem Av, which means the consoling father, this month is exceedingly maligned and misunderstood, because in reality, this month is also, it's a month of chastising, it's a month of rebuke, but it's a month of fatherly love. And eventually, towards the middle of the month, from the middle of the month on, and so too in the future, or hopefully now, this month becomes unmasked. This month of Av becomes unmasked, and we begin to understand that everything that's happened in this month is actually a divine directional signal from our Father in heaven to begin to return to him. That's his whole intention, with compassion, with understanding, with mercy. So what's happening here is that this month of Av, Menachem Av, the consoling, the comforting Father, comes in. And as it comes in, simultaneously, every time this Torah portion is read. And this Torah portion is giving us a signal. It's really a divine wink that should help properly set the tone for what is to come and for what this month is really all about. Because essentially, just as Moshe called his whole people together on the threshold of the land of Israel, and after we read that beautiful romantic recitation of the 42 journeys, now Moshe is saying, but mistakes were made and you must take responsibility. You must own up to your actions. But he did that with abundant love and mercy. So too, the month of Av comes in with its rebuke, but we realize that God's love for us never changes. It's ultimately, everything that's happening in this month is in order for us to rectify our relationship with him, to come into the land of Israel, to rebuild the temple, and to become the people that our Father in heaven knows that we can become.